Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever wondered how deep the roots of our modern beliefs truly go? Like, way back. Today, we're taking on a fascinating set of sources, including excerpts from a book called Symbols, Sex, and the Stars. Our mission today is to uncover the surprising origins of many widely held customs, religious concepts, and maybe even some daily practices.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, I think, is how this material allows us to trace the evolution of thought. You can really see how primitive understandings, often expressed through, really rich symbolism, shaped so much of what we consider modern. It's about seeing the patterns, the connections across time, across cultures.
So get ready for some serious aha moments, because we're about to challenge some assumptions you might have about history, science, faith. And remember, we're just diving into what these sources lay out. No new material added. So let's start with symbols. Our sources kick off by highlighting their power. Why do scholars put so much effort into, well, deciphering ancient symbols and beliefs?
Well, the sources are pretty clear on this. They state, genuine culture cannot be based upon the undeciphered paleography of primitive ages.
Paleography, ancient writing and symbols, right?
Exactly. So these ancient faiths, they often had their mysteries, secret initiations, symbolic lore, stuff generally kept from the public. And these early forms, they hold the kernel, the core, from which our present ideas evolved. You can actually see echoes of that primitive mentality even in modern symbols.
It seems like it's really difficult for most people to know the sources of current beliefs. Maybe because scholars specialize so much.
That's a big part of it. Things get siloed, which is why someone like Ernest Busenbark, the author of that book.
Symbols, Sex, and the Stars.
Right. Why his work was seen as so important. The sources describe his book as a key, because he brought together the results of modern exploration in this wide field, kind of unlocking popular beliefs and occult writings.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Celestial stuff. When we think ancient sky worship, we usually jump straight to the sun, don't we? But the sources flip that idea.
They absolutely do. It's quite startling. Moon worship was widely practiced long before the development of sun worship. That's a direct quote. In Babylonia, for example, the moon god ranked 30 was higher than the sun god, who was ranked 20.
Higher rank, wow.
Yeah, and get this. The sun was even called the son of the moon. You see that with Shamash being the offspring of Nanar in Sumeria.
And the moon wasn't just worshipped, it was practical. A regulator of time and fate.
Precisely. Take the octennial period. That's 8 years, or 99 months. It's the cycle where the full moon aligns perfectly with the longest or shortest day. That became a basis for ancient calendars, weaving together moon and sun time.
That's amazing. And it affected everyday life, too.
Deeply. The sources mention things like timing the weaning of children based on the moon for sturdiness or slimness, or beliefs from the Austrian Tyrol. People apparently consulted the moon before doing anything.
Anything. Like deciding when to plant crops
or even just starting a journey. And you have Galen, the famous physician in the 2nd century, teaching that your vitality at birth depended on the moon's phase.
And the customs, like the salam to the new moon, where was that?
Yeah.
Parsis in Bombay.
That's right. And the superstition about not pointing at the moon, you find that in England, Scotland.
Oh, yeah. I think I've heard that one.
The sources even tell a story about a girl supposedly being stricken dead for doing it. Shows how seriously they took it.
Yuck.
But then you see the shift. Sun worship starts to take root. And with it, new deities emerge, a more complex religion develops. This whole astral character starts influencing everything. Literature, architecture, the sciences.
Astronomy, astrology.
Right. The priests often were the astronomers, the diviners, the architects, designing temples to mimic the heavens. And here's a bit of irony. The very astronomical advances they made eventually helped discredit astrology as, a predictive science.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the civilizations themselves. Babylon, for instance. More than just myth, right? These were centers of serious innovation.
Oh, absolutely. The Babylonians had this incredibly practical and ingenious system of measures. Weight, volume, distance essential for trade, building.
What else? Metallurgy?
Yes, smelting iron, bronze, glass making too, remarkably early, like 1500 BC. They even used cobalt to get that beautiful blue glass.
And carpets. I wouldn't have guessed.
Apparently, they were famous for magnificent carpets. Highly prized.
And there's that connection to Eden, the biblical Eden.
Uh-huh. The sources link it to the land of Eden, or Edinu, which means the plain, matches the description in Genesis pretty closely.
So how do we know all this detail? Archaeology, I assume.
Exactly. The sources call it a thrilling achievement. They point to things like the Rosetta Stone, found in 1799, that cracked Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Right, huge breakthrough.
And then King Assurbanipal's library, found in Nineveh 1853, thousands of clay tablets. That discovery basically forced a rewrite of history. It made it necessary to revise many theories which had been unchanged for centuries, about everything: culture, history, religion.
And this is maybe the most mind-blowing part, the impact on biblical understanding.
Yes. Get this quote. The recovery of these ancient records have caused higher ecclesiastics to discard theses regarding the origin and nature of the Bible, which had been defended vigorously for centuries.
Wow. So, specific examples.
The sources state directly that many Mosaic laws traditionally from Moses, were actually derived from the Code of Hammurabi.
Hammurabi is Babylonian, right?
Yes, and his code predates Moses by potentially 2,000 years, according to these sources.
2,000 years.
Yeah. Think about the traditional Jewish belief. The first 5 books of the Bible given to Moses on Sinai, around 1510 BC. This archaeological evidence suggests a much, much older origin for some of those legal concepts. It certainly complicates the traditional timeline.
So, okay, what does all this mean for how religious ideas actually evolved? The sources seem to suggest a lot of mixing and adapting, especially for Judaism and early Christianity.
They really do. They talk about constant backsliding by the Israelites, forsaking Yahweh for local Canaanite gods like Baal or the Queen of Heaven, even though it was forbidden.
And pagan rites just kept going.
Apparently so. Enabled partly because you could sacrifice pretty much anywhere, so it wasn't always visible or controlled.
Then comes the Babylonian exile.
Yeah.
That seems like a huge turning point in the sources.
A massive one. The sources claim that during this time, Jews adopted key beliefs from Babylonian and Zoroastrian influences. Things like, well, the devil, angels, a future life, heaven, hell, resurrection, a final judgment day.
Concepts we often think of as core Judeo-Christian ideas.
But the sources trace their introduction to this period of exile and influence.
What about Satan? That seems like a big introduction.
It is, and the source notes something interesting, that Satan was introduced into Jewish scripture without any attempt being made to rationalize the belief in his existence, which, creates a kind of theological tension, an opposing force seemingly challenging an all-powerful God without a clear explanation within that initial framework.
Let's talk about the goddess figures, the Great Mother Goddess.
Yes, a very powerful ancient tradition. She appears everywhere under different names: Isis in Egypt, Devaki in India, Artemis, Tanit.
But fundamentally the same character.
Essentially the same character, yes. Representing fertility, life, the cosmic mother.
And the virgin aspect of these mother goddesses, how do the sources explain that?
It's linked back to the sky, specifically the moon and sun. Their relationship is seen as transient, not a permanent union like marriage. They wander eternally, right? So they cannot be represented as permanently united. This celestial dance informs the idea of a goddess who isn't bound by earthly marriage.
And that connects to temple virgins, and maybe even the interpretation of Alma for Mary.
The sources suggest those connections. The holy virgins in temples reflecting this divine independence, and questioning if Alma, meaning simply young woman, was later interpreted specifically as virgin in the context of Jesus' birth, a potential mistranslation with huge theological consequences.
Could you give a specific example of myth influencing later stories?
Okay, here's a fascinating one. Ishtar in Babylon. She was sometimes called Goddess 15.
15. Why 15?
It relates to the moon taking roughly 15 days to reach fullness. Now, the sources propose that the apocryphal Gospels of Matthew use this idea, the number 15, to create the story of the 3-year-old Virgin Mary ascending 15 temple steps.
Whoa! So taking a detail from an older lunar myth and weaving it into a new narrative.
That's the argument presented, yes, showing how these ancient symbolic numbers and ideas could persist and be repurposed.
Moving on to heroes and rituals. Many of these famous stories, like Hercules, seem to have cosmic roots too.
Definitely. The 12 labors of Hercules. The sources connect them directly to the sun's journey through the 12 signs of the zodiac each year.
Makes sense. What about Samson?
The Samson story, according to these sources, acquires meaning and significance only when considered as a lunar-solar myth.
Lunar, solar.
Yeah.
Both moon and sun.
Yes. For example, the 7 bowstrings he breaks, or the 14 bindings mentioned later, these numbers aren't random. They're seen as representing the phases of the moon, building to its full strength, then waning.
And the theme of death and rebirth, that feels universal.
Very much so. Tied to the seasons, the sun cycle. The death and rebirth of the sun god is a powerful allegory found in many cultures. Think about Christmas, December 25th. The sources point out that date wasn't fixed for Christ's birth until 530 AD.
And it coincided with.
An old pagan festival celebrating the winter solstice, the sun's rebirth after the shortest day.
And Easter, Passover.
Also linked to ancient solar festivals around the spring equinox, marking renewal, resurrection. These deep, ancient rhythms were woven into newer religious calendars.
Okay, the sources also talk quite a bit about fertility symbols, some pretty explicit stuff.
Yes, very prevalent. Phallic poles, maypoles, even the Asherim mentioned in the Bible are identified as such symbols. There were customs like making cakes shaped like sex organs, figures of Priapus, used for fertility, good luck, even health.
And these figures were even found on churches. Seriously.
Apparently so in some early contexts. It shows how deeply embedded these symbols were, crossing lines we might now see as distinct. The sources also mention religious prostitution, sacred prostitutes who were paradoxically called holy virgins, a very complex intersection of sex and the sacred.
And then there's the Kaaba in Mecca. This is quite a claim in the sources.
It is. They state its holiest object is a stone phallic image.
A phallic image.
That's what the sources assert. And they compare it to other ancient sacred container, arks or coffers, which they say held symbols of both male and female genitalia pudenda.
And they even connect the name.
Yes, they draw an etymological link between Kaaba and a Hebrew word for vulva, suggesting a very ancient connection to fertility worship at that site.
Wow. Okay, other symbolic actions. Baptism.
Hand gestures.
Right. Baptism often involved facing west to renounce Satan, then east to align with Christ, the Son of Righteousness. Very directional, very solar, and the whole right hand, left hand thing. Right hand equals masculine, good fortune. Left hand equals feminine, bad luck.
Which is where sinister comes from, right? Latin for left.
Exactly. A linguistic fossil of that ancient symbolic association.
Let's shift from physical symbols to abstract ones. Numbers. The Kabbalah.
Yes, the mystical interpretation of numbers in texts. The sources mention 108 being significant in Babylonian and Hindu traditions, Brahma's number, connected to human life cycles. And the number 216, 6 times 6, linked to metempsychosis.
Metempsychosis, reincarnation, basically.
Essentially, yes, the transmigration of the soul. These numbers weren't just math, they held cosmic weight.
Okay, let's unpack this Kabbalah technique, gematria. Gematria, where letters have numerical values, and you analyze the values of words or phrases to find hidden meanings in Scripture.
Like the example from Genesis, in the beginning.
Right. The numerical value of the first words allegedly adds up to the value of a phrase meaning, in the beginning of the year it was created, interpreted as meaning the world was created in autumn. It's a complex interpretive system.
And famous thinkers actually studied this. Newton, Bacon.
According to the sources, yes, Sir Isaac Newton, Sir Francis Bacon. They engaged with Kabbalistic ideas, testifying to their perceived validity at the time, however strange that might seem to us now.
The symbolism goes beyond just numbers, into geometry too.
Yes. The cube of 6, which is 216, that number again is the value of DBIR, the Hebrew term for the Holy of Holies. And 216 appears in descriptions of Babylonian arcs and even the New Jerusalem in Revelation.
Connections everywhere.
And the 5x8 rectangle. Its proportions relate to the YHVH number, 26, and allegedly echo the proportions of the Great Pyramid. It's also found in Masonic symbolism.
This raises an important question about concepts of God. The Kabbalist idea of Elohim.
Yes, the Kabbalist concept of Elohim as being threefold, distinct aspects, yet fundamentally one. This idea, rooted deep in Jewish mysticism, shows really striking parallels to the later Christian theological debates about the Trinity, the ones formalized at the Council of Nicaea. It suggests maybe a shared conceptual pool long before Nicaea.
Okay, now for maybe the most provocative part of this deep dive, early Christianity itself. The sources paint a picture that's quite different from the traditional one.
They do. There's a statement that Christianity was practically dominated by magic and demonism until well after the Middle Ages. That definitely challenges common perceptions.
And this claim about the Apostle Paul, this is astonishing, that he didn't know about Jesus' miracles or teachings.
The sources explicitly claim that, stating in his day they had not yet been invented.
Not invented yet, meaning they were developed later.
That's the implication. The sources follow up by saying the 4 Gospels we have were first definitely mentioned by Irenaeus around 190 AD.
Which is quite a long time after Jesus lived, over 150 years.
A significant gap, yes, raising questions about the timeline of when the Gospel narratives solidified and were written down.
So if not directly from Jesus via the disciples initially, Where did early Christian practices and beliefs come from?
Well, connecting this to the bigger picture, the sources suggest strong influences from earlier groups. Cults like the Essenes and the Therapeutae. Paul, for instance, though he sometimes argued against Essene ideas, practiced healing and exorcism, and preached virtues very similar to theirs.
Even church fathers admitted similarities.
Yes, figures like Lactantius and Augustine acknowledged parallels between Christian practices and pagan traditions. They didn't necessarily see it as borrowing, often framing it as paganism imperfectly anticipating Christianity, but they saw the overlap.
And the comparison with Mithraism seems particularly strong in the sources.
Extremely strong. Shared elements included sacraments, mysteries, or secret rites, ascetic ideals, belief in immortality, heaven, hell, resurrection, a final battle between good and
A
evil.
lot of overlap.
A huge amount, leading the source to make that very provocative statement. If Christianity had been arrested in its growth by some mortal malady, the world would have been Mithraic.
So, wow. After this journey, millennia of thought, moon worship, Babylon, Kabbalah, early Christianity, what does this all mean for us, for you, the listener, today?
Well, I think the core takeaway is that knowledge gains value when it's really understood and applied, right? These sources, they remind us that beliefs, even the ones we hold most deeply, are often composites. They're built from earlier ideas, experiences. They evolve. They change over time, influenced by so many different cultures and interpretations. Nothing exists in a vacuum.
It really shows the human mind's constant search for meaning, doesn't it? Always using symbols, myths, complex belief systems to try and understand the world.
Absolutely. So maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. If so much of what we often accept as solid, established truth has these deep, tangled roots in such diverse, sometimes surprising, ancient practices, what does that really tell us about the nature of truth itself, about belief? How might understanding these origins, these hidden connections, change how you look at the world around you, maybe even your own deepest convictions?
Plenty to think about there. We certainly hope this deep dive has given you a lot to mull over and maybe explore further on your own. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep expanding your understanding.